What's good? Rocking with your boy Czar, all rights reserved. First, we talked about rogue officers, or rogue officials, you could say. People who act within but around the law in order to catch dangerous and deadly criminals. That's a very prevalent part of how many most wanted cases are handled if special forces within authority cannot maintain any declaration to handle these criminals. Now we got to discuss around the case about evidence. So, what is the official evidence that is going to basically link these men to the situation without them appearing? Well, the first part is that they would not address their accusers. And that's actually the main part. When you act in a way without addressing your accusers, you always chance the case of that being the evidence itself. That is why I told these young men that they needed to catch up and address their accusers, because doing so an opposite way puts you in harm's way. But now, here's the thing. You now put your family out there because they're alleging you committed a violent crime, and your relatives are going to be thought to have some idea of where you may be. This opens up the relative factor. Now, the relative factor I speak of is how they're able to basically track you in multiple different ways. See, when you're unable to gain a normal means of business and able to have the funds to support your business, which a person who even works a daily job can, you have to continue to commit crime in order to stay up. So that's what they're counting on. So because they may presume you left the state, and even if you have left the state, unless you had the financial means to support yourself in time enough for three things to occur. The first thing to occur is for you to, let's say, get surgery to change some type of feature that would be used to identify you. That major feature would be facial features. So unless you had some type of surgery to change your makeup physically, there's going to be really no way to avoid being identified at some point in time. Doesn't matter how these men escaped. Number two, your identification. Your identification needed to change. That means that you needed to have some sort of legally identifiable ID that was created along with your new look to help you produce a different image so that you could not be identified readily in any given point of time. Number three, you needed to have a stable and different location. And when I say that, you needed to create a different life, such as FBI does for individuals who may be witnesses with their life in danger, dealing with large organizations that may have hits out on these different people. These are the three factors that a person must have aligned if they choose to get away and to avoid their accusers. These three matters take large sums of money, in which I do not think the two men on the run have. Now, here's my thing. Even with these factors, you need to have some type of knowledge of the scenery and the location of states where you could not be identified. And when I say that, you needed to do research in order to know locations that are very seldom tuned into social media news, such as this. That would lower the chances of you being identified altogether, let alone it coming up for you to be linked to anything dealing with this case, which again takes large sums of money in order to verify you. These factors are not only provided by FBI, but they would have to have some type of connections from state to state within a legal manner of officials such as the FBI in order for them to obtain connects who may be ex-military, may be ex-state employees, or someone with networking that allows you to have access to these characteristics to add to your, let's say, profile. Now, the thing that gets me about these two men on the run is that just like the two men that were caught, where were they identified other than in the pictures we seen or off of social media? This poses a risk because if they are identified by somebody, if they act out of line or they do not notify the proper authorities, they are in jeopardy, which makes you a higher risk to the public. The relative factors works into this way. Because you do not have these means, because you do not have access to any of these things, it is easily identifiable that you will have contact with relatives. And when I say relatives, I don't just mean people of your blood who have similar genetic DNA that can be identified as family, but your friends. We do not need to see them grab your friend's phone or relative's phone and put something in it in order for them to trace. That means if I see family withdrawing a large amount of money, or I notice that phone-wise they're making a frequent amount of calls to some area, I can then notify officials to a certain area, and if they cannot find you, the rogue officials have connections where they're closely watching and detailing these sort of issues. Part of why I mentioned rogue officials and exactly who they were to mention this exact point. So relatives are in danger now because you've possibly committed a dangerous crime, and if they're communicating with you frequently at some point in time and they resist, there can be violence done towards them, thinking that they're working in cahoots with your entire plan. The evidence has only identified you two men as suspects, and it didn't, let's say, damn you to it. But the fact you ran and you used escape as a means of dealing with your situation, you now are presumed guilty. There's no factor where you'll come back to a court case, a grand jury, and fight for your rights. So the point of mentioning this is that their constitutional rights are null and void. You no longer have a stance or an answer for why you ran, even if you wanted to say you wanted freedom for a while. Again, remember in the past I told you the longer you avoid officials, the higher the cost on your head goes. As far as officials and authorities in the state of Florida, not only that, the higher the penalty for when you are caught. So to find a lawyer that's able to beat these charges is near impossible. Now I say near impossible because there can always be variables to fight the issue, but very few lawyers are going to recognize these variables because of what situation you're in, let alone defend you, because they're going to protect their reputation. They don't want to be known as the lawyer or the defense that's defending men that potentially killed someone and is on the run. The only way to have truly avoided this was to get out of the country as soon as possible with the finances you had. Staying in the United States of America is no safe way for you to avoid being caught. It doesn't matter if you're going into a McDonald's, a Sheetz, a Starbucks, a pizza place, a Mexican place, or anything, a cell phone store, electronics store like a Best Buy. There's no way to avoid it. You are now linked to this case by facial recognition. And that's what most people don't realize. Facial recognition, fingerprinting, these things have listed to become more intelligent as technology has grown. You now are dead to rights, which means not literally you're dead to rights, but your social means and your citizenship is potentially revoked, because if you use your identification anywhere, your name anywhere, or they suspected you are who you are continually hunted. And the thing was, you had to go to a different country for asylum away from this instance in order to survive the type of manhunt that will begin, I'm going to say, in a few months, if it already hasn't. This is why it's better to just face your accusers. And I'm going to potentially put this out there because it's very important for criminals and people who are potential criminals to understand the depths of what it means to not face your accusers. That means once you've chosen to escape instead of stand, you now are recognized as basically a foreigner to your citizenship. So you get all of your constitutional rights revoked, and any means possible can be used to take you out. The relatives, if they're linked to you, assisting you in any way, whether it's 30 years from now until you get caught or 5 years from now, they also too will be held to the same criminal standard and prosecuted for supporting you to escape from what we know to be justice. That is why I say it's better to face your accusers. It is a better chance that Michael Boatwright and Dedrick D. Williams can fight their case versus you, because they're in custody and they have a right, still the constitutional rights, to prove their innocence. So potentially they have lawyers that can fight from some type of standpoint. That is why I say when you get relatives involved, things can get messy. Situations can get dangerous. That's why the potential for you guys to be held in custody or attacked is very high. I feel bad for their families, and I hope that they figure something out, and I hope that they're not involved in supporting this type of criminology. The relative factor, all rights reserved.